So, as most of you know, I have a series called the Five Question Series, and normally it is a text interview. However, I very rarely make exception to have video interviews with people. And this week I'm very excited to have author Andrew Buckley as my interviewee. We're going to talk about his book, Havelock. And Andrew is an author, a screenwriter, a teacher, a scone eater, a maker of cinnamon buns, and my BFF. Andrew, thank you for coming on my little thing today.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate being here.
So, we're talking today about your book, Havelock, which I loved. And I did not expect to love it because it's a spy thriller, and that is totally outside of my genre. I 100% only read it because it is written by you, and I love everything you write. And this was no exception. So, can you tell us a little bit about like what Havelock is about?
I can, and I appreciate you reading it. I know it's not your style of thing, but I was elated that you read it and then you actually really liked it too. That's awesome. Havelock is my only spy thriller, but it is about Eliana Havelock, who is a mysterious woman that comes out of the woodwork right around the same time that MI6 in London is falling to pieces, and there is a global threat with an unknown arms dealer that has a new product that could threaten the world market in horrible, nefarious ways. And all throughout, it's about Eliana trying to help MI6 combat this threat while having her own agenda, which kind of gets revealed piece by piece throughout the book.
So my first question, I have 5 questions that I'm gonna ask you about the book, hence it
Okay.
being called the 5 question series, and then a bonus question not about the book. The first question I have is, first of all, this book, and probably one of the reasons I loved it so much, is despite being a spy thriller, it's very woman-centric. Eliana, of course, is the main character, but then the other really strong character in this is the head of MI6, Margaret Ralston, who is
Mhm.
also a strong character and really kind of, in my opinion, the only person that can meet Eliana where she is as sort of almost equals.
Mhm.
Um, I was wondering then, what made you decide to write from the point of view of a woman? And kind of tied into that, what were the challenges you faced when writing from the voice of that character?
Those are good questions in one question. It's a good multi-question question.
Thank you.
Yeah. When I first came up with the concept, I mean, it was sort of a bit of a love letter to James Bond because I grew up watching James Bond, grew up in England. James Bond is a national institution. Everybody loves it. It's on TV all the time. Every holiday, there's Bond movies. So I was very familiar with those. And then when I got a little bit older, I read Ian Fleming's entire catalog, and aside from the horrible misogyny and racism that he has in most of those books, the actual spy thriller aspect of those books is really, really good. And I wanted to propose the question as to what happened, because every single book he had a different girl, he had a different relationship. And it wasn't as it was displayed in the movies where it was just meaningless, a hot girl shows up and Bond beds this girl and she either dies or he leaves her in the end. In the book, he actually had actual relationships with these women. And so it was very different. But I always wondered what happened if he had actually had a child with one of these women and then went off on his missions and disappeared or died or whatever else. And what would happen to that child? How would that child actually grow up? So that is what was kind of the impetus for this story in the first place. And I always, if he'd had a male, it felt like it would just be too linear of a line of how that boy would turn out. But if he had a girl, and how would she feel about growing up without a father, but with a very, very strong-willed mother? And how would she tackle the world? And how would she come to terms with this father that she has some kind of idea as to who he was and what he did for a living? And would she go searching for him? And if she did go searching for him, how would she go about it coming from that position and being born into that world? So it kind of had to be a female. I don't think in my brain it was never he was never having a son. It was always going to be a daughter. And I just like the idea of a strong willed female. And I liked in the I forget what the years were, but when Pierce Brosnan came in as Bond and Judi Dench played M, I love Judi Dench's version of that character because she's a strong-willed, sarcastic, sassy badass who manages all these other ridiculously strong-willed males for the most part. You don't see a female until the newer ones. So I liked her characterization of that, and I was like, so I took some elements of that, especially from Margaret Ralston, because that was kind of the inspiration behind that character. But then for Eliana herself to be a strong-willed female who can think her way around these situations, who can roll with all the punches, and who can be flexible enough to deal with all these strong personalities, and not just like deal with them, but like dominate over them in most cases. She's always the smartest person in the room, and I love that about that character, and I loved writing that character. It was super fun to do.
I really loved her, and as someone who has mostly read strong female characters written by women, and also as somebody who has read female characters written by men and mocked them mercilessly in a lot of cases because they're so badly done, I had a little trepidation about coming into the book and reading this character, and then to find within about 5 pages of reading her, I was all in, forgot that this was written by my best friend, and was just really legitimately enjoying the book. So I was really thrilled about that.
Well, you weren't the only one that had trepidation. When I first wrote this back in 2015 and tried to release it, my agent at the time was like, you can't release this under your name because no one's going to trust a male to write a strong female character like this. And my publisher also echoed that, which is why its first iteration way back in the day, it was released under a female pen name, which was useless for marketing and everything else. And I took the rights back after a while. But that there is that weird thing in where, and I think it is weirdly skewed on to be one-sided, where female writers can write strong male characters. Romantasy, I mean, I've read so much romantasy this year, it's ridiculous. And the amount of female writers writing what they believe to be strong male characters is so ridiculous. The characterizations of some of these characters. But for it to be the other way around, to say a male can't write a female character, I mean, I'm pretty interested in my feminine side, so I think maybe I've navigated it better, but I feel that you should be able to write both, and it should be okay.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And I would also agree that you're very in touch with your feminine side, which
Thank
is
you.
one of the things I love about you. I want to stay with Eliana for another minute because, as you know, I'm a point of view nerd. We just had a conversation about me having very excited feelings about Margaret Atwood and her point of view
That's an
mastery.
understatement.
It's
That's an
yeah,
understatement.
it's a bit of an understatement. So listen, you made what I consider to be a very bold choice, and as a point of view nerd, I really love this. But you wrote Eliana's point of view in first person present tense, and then all of the other machinations are in third person past tense,
Mhm.
which I found very interesting. I loved it. I really enjoy that kind of weirdness, and it felt right for the stories I was reading. But I'm wondering, like, what made you decide to do that, and what were the challenges in writing in that way?
It's such a risk to do that, and I still question myself as to whether it was the right thing to do. But people seem to like it. The initial when I started writing it, it was first person from Eliana's point of view, because the first thing I ever wrote was that first chapter where she's trapped, and it's her perspective. And I intended the entire book to be first person from her point of view originally. And then when I suddenly realized it was going to be impossible to structure the story in a way that was going to be cinematic, for lack of a better description, yeah, it had to be. I had to switch it up, but I didn't want to lose Eliana's voice because I really love her tone and the way that she thinks and the way that she works out her problems and like categorizes inventories everything, and like just the way that her brain works. I think that helps pull the reader into the story more, and that when you get to an Eliana chapter, you're like, oh great, I get to be in her head again, whereas everybody else is looking at it from an outside perspective, and you get to see both sides of that. And I think some characters just work better that way. I think the third person works for everybody else, but it makes Eliana stand out, and it really drags the reader in. So the challenge of it was just switching perspectives can be jarring, and to try and make it a smooth transition was really tricky. And I ended up looking back to a lot of screenwriting classes that I took as far as trying to make scene transitions work. So I tried to make chapter transitions work in a smooth way where they weren't fractured, where the reader wouldn't be jarred out of the story because I switched perspectives between each chapter. But it was challenging. It was a pain in the ass for me, and it was a pain in the ass for my editor. But it worked out okay in the end.
I thought it did work out okay because for me as the reader, the experience was I was with Eliana in every part of hers, and then the other stuff is like all of that kind of like historical stuff that I need to know in order to stay in her story.
Mm-hmm.
So it felt very intentional to me, even if, ultimately you as the writer, maybe it wasn't you were wondering if it was the right, it felt like the right decision for me.
I think it worked out in the end. And because you get her vulnerability, you also get her wins, you get her excitement, you get her conniving nature that is very natural to her. Like it's all right there on the page, and you don't have to guesswork with it. Like Eliana is who she is, and so I think by the time you get to her second or third chapter, you have a pretty solid understanding of who this woman is and what she's about. So I like that. First person works really well for that, and
Yeah.
I think it's the only time I've ever written in first person as well. I don't generally skew that way.
Um, in this book, one thing I was thinking while I was reading it, and this is question number three, by the way. I know it seems like it's been like 20 right now, but you have so many moving parts in this book. There's this political intrigue, and there's the things that are happening over here, and then there's the things that are happening with the spies, and then there's Eliana's backstory, and then the clues that the agents are trying to follow to go find her. How much of that was pure research and how much of that is your own personal interest in world affairs and politics?
I will happily go on record saying that I have no interest in world affairs and politics, like ever. It, but writing a spy thriller, I had to set some of it in reality, and so I did do research into the Golden Triangle and um, a lot of arms issues that they had around Karachi, especially that time in the 2000 early 2000s to 2015 or so, and moving armaments for Burma. I looked into all that. I also looked at the infrastructure of MI6 and all of the actual like military branches of the government in the UK to see what all of them, because they all have call signs. The only one that didn't have one was an MI13 because they believed it to be bad luck. They literally skipped that one. So it's kind of interesting to look at the structure of all that. So I did research on that end. The the technology that exists, the not to spoil it or anything, but the product that is at the center of it is based on actual real technology that they were playing with in Australia for a while. And I heard about it in a keynote speech at a high school, I think, that I was visiting once, where they talked
Interesting.
about nanotechnology and how they were experimenting to use it to freeze the interior of a car during a car accident. Like if there was a car accident instead of an airbag, nanoparticles would be released into the car and they would freeze. So the passengers would be held in place in a breathable structure so that they wouldn't be hurt during the car accident. And it was all due to these programmable microbots. And I think Michael Crichton wrote a book called Prey, which I might be getting wrong. That was about the same kind of technology, and I like the concept of that. So all that was research.
Yeah.
Everything else was just out of my brain. The A, B, and C storyline of this book with trying to solve this world crisis, of figuring out who Eliana really is, and them going on this journey around the world. Like it's all of that was there from the beginning for the most part, and I knew I wanted those pieces. I just didn't know how. So the research really did help fill that out, I suppose.
I was thinking while I was reading it that you must have done a pretty intense plotting for this just because of how many pieces had to connect and there wasn't anything, you didn't lay anything down and then not come and pick it back up in some way throughout the book. So I thought that that was something that you would have had to be really intentional about.
Yeah, it was originally serialized. This was an experiment in it was before Amazon reintroduced their serial platform, but there was a lot of noise at the time around serialized stories again. And so Havelock was used as an experiment to see if that would work. So it had to be played out from start to finish. And then I was writing it as it was being released in a lot of cases. which was kind of an interesting way to go about it as well.
Yeah. So,
Mhm.
speaking of serialized, in another interview, you said that this is potentially a first in a series. What's next for Eliana, if anything?
There's a sequel that's sketched out. I haven't written it. It's one of those where I wanted to see how the first book did first before I wrote spent the time and wrote a sequel. But I love that character so much, and her journey was always meant to be 3 to 4 books, kind of depending. There are some liberties that are taken because of the ties with the James Bond universe, which are not directly referred to in this book, but are present because of copyright laws and those kinds of things. I had to dance around them. I don't know how far I can push the story to actually completion without some statute of limitations on IP actually running out. So we'll see. I definitely have the idea for the second book, and the second book could be written and it'd be totally fine to be released. Beyond that, I'd have to take a look and see how long the copyright stands on some of the James Bond stuff to see if I can actually complete it.
Not giving any spoilers away at all, but I felt like you definitely left space for a
Mhm.
pretty intriguing follow-up with the end of the book.
Yeah, it and the end, the second book picks up basically exactly where the first book leaves off in the part that you're talking about. Yeah.
Okay. So without giving any spoilers, I do want to say that if you do write the next book, that I really feel that Quentin should come back because
Mm-hmm.
he was one of my favorite characters.
I loved writing Quentin so much because, and it was kind of interesting because I wrote that character quite a long time before the Daniel Craig ones started to come out, but then they introduced a Q character who is not that far off of who Quentin, the same kind of characterization that Quentin is, where I think even in the Daniel Craig James Bonds that Q in that story was also gay. So I was like, I wrote that character already. That's annoying. It's one of those cases where I wrote that first. I swear to God. But yeah, I always loved his character. I love his methodical thinking. I like his general cleanliness with everything and the organization of him being the control behind MI6. I thought it was super fun, but also super quirky and always knows what's going on without really revealing that he knows what's going on. He's great.
I can't remember his name, but I also really like the character that's like the big guy that's always hot that keeps getting sent to all of these like tropical climates.
I I really like putting him through his paces because I like the idea of an older agent who has kind of aged out realistically and is gained the weight and he's in charge of the training program and he doesn't really like want to like be a part of it anymore. But because he is a trusted older agent, they're like, no, you have to be the person to do all this stuff. And so to put him in all the uncomfortable situations was so fun. I really like that character. He was so funny.
So I have one more question about this book specifically, and then we have the bonus question.
Okay.
So this book specifically, the villain in this was so chilling, and I think I remember messaging you or texting you after one of the scenes of violence
Mm-hmm.
in this. But there's several that I was just like, wow, okay, this is really a lot. Now, surprisingly, not when Eliana did any of her violence. I was like, yeah, those people deserve it because
That's
clearly,
right.
she's on the side of good. But in reading some of like your villain was really well fleshed out and really creepy and edgy and also felt very realistic. It didn't feel like a caricature of a villain. It felt like this is someone that could actually exist, which made it scarier. And I'm wondering then, do you feel like you have a little bit of psychopath in you to write something like that?
Wow. Um, that would be a delve into my psychological background, I suppose. I actually, if you, I mean, any of my stories, if you look at the villains, I really like a maniacal villain. Like I'd never like a straight-laced villain. I like somebody who is cool and calculating and absolutely horrible.
Yeah.
Like I always want to push them to the next extreme. And Tredic was a great. I thought I really liked writing that character and his henchwoman. I thought they were both super fun to play with because they're both, well, she's definitely a psychopath and he is certainly on the spectrum. It's I don't think I'm a psychopath, but I do like. I mean, come on, writing villains is so fun. You know that. I mean, in our Hamlet retelling, like Claudius is one of the most fun characters to write because he's purely evil and horrible, and like it's always more fun to write the villains than it is the heroes for the most part. And
It is.
yeah, I get
Absolutely.
it. Not
So
not
it's
not a psycho.
that was absolutely a throwaway question. So I'm going to give you a chance to redeem yourself.
Okay.
If you had somebody who was thinking of reading this book, but was, like, oh well, I don't care about spy thrillers, what would be a reason that you would tell them they should pick up this book?
It's not a straight laced spy thriller. It's an adventure story. It's full of action. I've been pitching it as a smart, action packed, sexy thriller because that is what it is. If you like the cinematic world of James Bond or any of the other Mission Impossibles or those kinds of things, it's meant to feel like a summer blockbuster movie in a book. That's was always my intention. I'm a super summer blockbuster movie whore. Like I love all those kinds of things where you get to go and turn your brain off a little bit and just enjoy the thrill ride of it all. That's what I wanted for Havelock. So even if you don't like straight list spy thrillers like Red Sparrow or Jason Bourne or those kinds of things, you can still sink your teeth into this and it'll still be a fun adventure story.
I agree very much. All right, are you ready for your bonus question that has nothing to do with
Yes,
your work at all?
I am.
Have you ever taken a picture of a weird bird?
So this is the bird thing, isn't it?
It's a
There's a
bird thing.
consistency on this bird thing, isn't
The
there? Like,
bird thing, yeah.
I
And
don't
if
think
you
so.
have, then you have to send it so I can post it with the episode.
I know I weird bird. I don't take pictures of other than my chickens. I don't actually take pictures of birds. Like I've never been a bird person. I actually hate birds. Also hated chickens until 2 months ago. So
I mean, how can you hate birds? Like, I don't
they're
think a
horrible,
person
flappy,
can hate
tweety
birds.
things. Like I've never liked them. We've never had them as pets. Like it's just never been something that I've never been drawn to birds. I don't like birds, but I do love my two chickens. So I guess that's, and I have lots of selfies with my chickens.
It's
So
true. We can put a selfie of you with your chicken with the
that's probably what
episode.
it's going to have to be, unfortunately, because I don't have any pictures of interesting birds. But yeah, my chickens have so much personality. They're just pets. I can pet them and they purr. They're adorable.
It's true. I held one of your
Yes, you
chickens.
held my chickens.
I
Yeah, it's
did.
true.
Well,
Yeah.
thank you so much for being, as always, a delightful guest. I
Well, thank you for
appreciate you.
having me.
My
I really
pleasure.
appreciate it.
My pleasure. And I hope that everyone will please pick up the book Havelock, which I will post the cover with the episode and the link to purchase. And Andrew, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Finn.